Young with the Boot Brisbane campaign up here in Cairns. With me this evening is Head Coordinator Bill Bates. Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, David.
Yeah. And our special guest this evening, ladies and gentlemen, it is Alex Witten, who's a real estate agent in the Cairns area, specialising in subdivision development as well as just commercial and private real estate. So good evening, Alex, and thank you for taking time out of your week and your evening to join us.
It's a pleasure, David. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now, Alex has been involved in the property industry in Cairns for over 30 years, ladies and gentlemen. He's the principal and licensee of his own agency. Alex's knowledge of land subdivision and development is extensive. He's a qualified surveyor, and his early work covered the detailed and technical side of land subdivision. But Alex, a little bit later, Alex was appointed marketing manager of the Tony Price Group of companies. And as such, he broadened his subdivision knowledge to include all aspects of marketing, sales, acquisition and finance. He's been an enthusiastic supporter of the Real Estate Institute of Queensland and became the inaugural chairman of the property management chapter and remained chairman for 4 years. Now, that was a little while ago now. In 1995, he was elected the board of directors of the REIQ and the Institute of Queensland and served in its capacity for 5 consecutive years. You also, I see here, occupied the board position for the Real Estate Industrial Organisation of Employers, a position you had 5 years, Alex. So you've been in the game. You're well and truly entrenched in real estate, and predominantly, if not all of it, just about, has been involved in the Cairns region. So, Alex, if it's okay, if we can kickstart things off, having been involved in the real estate industry for so long in the Cairns region, how are things at the moment, would you say, compared to how they've been over your tenure of being a real estate agent in the Cairns area?
Yeah, look, Cairns has always gone through ups and downs in real estate. We've had good times and bad times, and sadly there's been more bad times than good times. Look, the market's tough now, but it's probably better than I expected. There's a couple of aspects to real estate. First of all, the residential sales side of things. The market is really quite buoyant. The properties are selling. There are vendors out there who want to sell and there are buyers out there who want to buy. The biggest impediment to the market at the moment is the availability of credit, the ability of buyers to access finance. Since the Kenneth Hayes Royal Commission into the financial sector, the banks have changed all of their lending criteria, and it is now very hard to get a loan. So that's one of the biggest problems we have with the sales market. The rental market, on the other hand, is just going gangbusters. Our own rent roll has a vacancy rate of less than 1%. It's so close to zero, it doesn't matter. Rents are going up. Needless to say, with such a low vacancy rate, there is extreme pressure on rents, and they're definitely going up. And I predict that rents will go up a lot more yet. In the commercial and industrial sector, that's really tough. We're still in the middle of the whole COVID thing. A lot of tenants aren't paying their rent, and receiving rent relief. There's a lot of vacant space around the city, too much. It's pretty sad, actually. So the industrial commercial side of things is very tough.
Well, you touched on a very interesting subject there, Alex. I'd like to go further into it because one of the most prominent things that any Cairns resident can go and see for themselves is when they drive around the CBD of our city and they can see all the empty buildings. And to what extent would you say that it's maybe a diluted market where rent's maybe too expensive or those sort of complicated factors that might be the reasons why those premises are vacant? Or to what extent is it that there is just a severe lack of people willing to have their premises in the CBD, basically because maybe things like a depressed market currently that we're experiencing through COVID of things like the dependency on tourists? Do you think that is predominantly the major factor, or is there other links to that?
Oh, look, I think there's a lot of other factors. We're talking CBD commercial rent now, whether it's retail or office space. There's definitely a trend away from the CBD for retail, and the whole retail sector is under an enormous amount of pressure anyway from online purchasing.
Yeah, of course.
So even major shopping centres are having big problems in holding their tenants. So small shops around the CBD are very hard to rent. As far as office space is going, it's really, really tough. The tenants that are around looking, one of the biggest things they want is car space, parking. If you can't offer parking, you will not rent that space. And there is such a around Cairns, which the landlords can't give away. I was only talking to a valuer about this recently, and we both felt that a lot of this sort of office space has no value. It doesn't matter what rent you put on it. No one wants it. So, very, very difficult market in that area around the CBD, both in retail and the commercial side of things. So, probably we're seeing rents drop. And look, there's always sectors that do well, like along the Esplanade, for example. It's always busy. Normally with a normal tourist season, it's just packed down there. So it still maintains high rental values. But as soon as you start stepping back from there into Abbott Street, Lake Street, Grafton Street,
yes.
Yes. The rents are under a lot of pressure, downwards.
Well, of course, and we'll always see that activity throughout the day, as you say, on the Esplanade through the hospitality sector, really driving that traffic along the Esplanade. And the council's done such a fantastic job to make everybody want to go and enjoy that area as well. So, but
yeah, sure.
Could you definitely say? I mean, it's obviously the component of the CBD that's suffering at the moment is that retail sector. But I mean, as somebody that's spent so much time in the industry, and one of the topics that we wanted to cover tonight on the show was the trends that you've observed in the commercial real estate and over the period of time. Could you tell us good indicators of the economic health of a major city like Cairns? I mean, for that matter, they could take that example and use it in Townsville, because as far as we all understand here, Townsville is suffering in the exact forms and the exact ways as we are, with the CBD dwindling in activity, not just from an attack on retail stores, but there's an active disinterest in people wanting to actively open stores. Do you see any trends that you've observed over the years?
Oh, unquestionably. Look, when I first went into commercial real estate, which was back in the very early 80s, CBD property was absolutely blue chip. It was the best property you could buy. CBD rentals were high. Even first floor, second floor office space, always demand for it. All of that's changed. You take the Cairns CBD now, and all it is coffee shops and little tourist booths. There's not much else, a few restaurants. There's a trend for retail to move into the big shopping centres. People don't want to be walking around in the rain. They want to shop in air conditioning, and they want to park easily without coming back to their car and finding a ticket on the windscreen. So the trend is for shopping to move out of the CBD. Look, it's been huge since the 70s or the 80s, the way the CBD has changed. And as I said, from an investment point of view, back in the 80s, to own a CBD property in Cairns was to own a working gold mine. Today, it's just quite the opposite. We're only today discussing a property that we're involved with down on Spence Street, and the owner is just saying, get me out. Just get me out of it. No one wants it. So it's very, very difficult. Yeah. And one of the other things, this whole COVID situation is teaching a lot of people how to work from home. And there's a lot of professionals saying now that, look, when COVID's over, we might just continue to work from home. So, back in the 80s, there was a lot of demand for small serviced offices, for the one-man professional, the small office. You don't need a lot. You just need somewhere to go and work every day, have a desk, a telephone, the photocopier. That's all changed. People do that from home now. So all those serviced offices, like in the Crane Gold Centre and others around the place, there used to be another one here in Appleton Street. There's no demand for that anymore. People are working from home. It's so easy to do it. You can have a laptop, a mobile phone, a little portable printer, and you're at work.
Yes.
So again, that's another trend that we would have never predicted in the 80s.
Yes, but I guess, and home consultation, no matter what your profession, is becoming a lot more popular as well. I mean, once you can call a phone and get a doctor to come and give you a checkup at home an hour later, You know the world's changed, but
Yep.
I guess the component as well. There's how concerned we should be that it doesn't do much for the economic confidence of the city when so many premises do have that for lease sign on the front window, and it's so frequent as you drive down a major street like Grafton, like Abbott, like Lake,
Yep.
and one of the most interesting components I had to think of when you mentioned it before, I think it was just before we started the show, was about, there's other economic factors we need to consider as well, as because if premises are for sale, there's not going to necessarily be the right buyers because the money is being is in the purse strings with a lot tighter knots these days with the banks and not wanting to lend money, and I guess that only contributes to the same sort of problem, doesn't it?
Oh, look, entirely. I mean, the value, the capital value of the property is determined by the amount of rent it can earn. So as the earnings have diminished and the vacancy rates have crept up, the values have dropped. As I said, back in the 80s, to own a CBD property was just the ultimate. It isn't anymore. I can tell you, people want out of them. And as you say, you drive around the city now and you see all these for lease signs. It's depressing. It's really sad. And we're better off, I might add, than Townsville. When you drive down Flinders Street in Townsville, that is depressing.
Yeah.
There's tumbleweeds rolling down that street. Look, I think there's a lot of social change here, the way that we live our lives. There are now more units in the city, more people, coming into the CBD as a lifestyle, hence more coffee shops and more restaurants to cater for those people. And it's a tourist precinct. It's not so much a retail commercial precinct that it used to be. That's the view I take anyway, the way I see it. And I think it's just part of the changing nature of all CBDs, not just Cairns, all CBDs.
Well, of course, and it might be a good factor. Sorry, Bill, I'll just say one comment and then we'll hear from you. I guess we can't take one. Sorry, my train of thought was we can't convert our CBD into a hospitality and food and beverage sort of mecca when the diversified economy around Cairns isn't somewhere like Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne. I mean, obviously Melbourne's not a great example at the moment for a hive of activity, but we can't expect Cairns to grow in that sort of sector and turn the CBD into a food and beverage sort of centre when it doesn't matter when there's no jobs in any other industries other than tourism that is strong in nature. And it's the mind boggles.
We've always had a problem in that area. Cairns is very reliant on the tourist sector.
Exactly.
And of course, at the moment, that's just shut down. But again, our CBD is travelling better than Townsville. I don't want to keep picking on Townsville. I'm not one of these Townsville versus Cairns people, but they're two very different cities, and our CBD still has some life in it, and we do have restaurants in there, and one of the reasons is because our CBD is right adjacent to that Esplanade boating precinct, and that's where all the tourists congregate. Hence, they support the restaurants and coffee shops and all of this sort of thing. But, we've got a long way to go. We've got a lot of problems here, and the COVID situation is not helping it. Yeah.
And all the more reason we need to concentrate on solving those issues and saying, well, retail might be closing down and the landscape is changing, but how do we make a more diversified economy around all these changes that have happened in the last 10, 20, 30 years in the technological boom that we've experienced? So it's tough times ahead, Ted. Tough times ahead, as you say, and we need to be able to make those decisions to actively change the destiny in which Central and North Queensland can achieve those goals and move with the times, especially a lot quicker than currently does at the moment. But Bill, what was your thought? Sorry, I want to go back to you. Did you have a thought?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think CBD's been changing for a long time. I come from Melbourne. I've spent more than 20 years there. And Melbourne started undergoing changes maybe 15, 20 years ago in the city, where a lot of office buildings started to lose their tenancy and more those properties were turned into pretty flash accommodation apartments and that. I mean, there's a lot of historic buildings there that used to belong to the banks and other sort of well-known institution like mercantile, insurance and all those things. But they gradually no longer needed those premises, and there was no uptake by other commercial activity. But it certainly generated interest for accommodation, permanent accommodation for the people who like that inner city lifestyle. Alex, do you think maybe that's what Cairns will need to do in its CBD is promote more changes in regards to allowing some of this commercial space to turn into residential, or maybe even worst comes to worst, actually knock it down and get more residential in there, and hopefully the general permanent population in there will sort of create a bit of a renaissance in regards to the retail and the general shopping in there, because you've got a reasonably high permanent population in the CBD.
Unquestionably, Bill, I mean, if you look at the development of the CBD now, there are now quite a number of large-ish residential apartment blocks in the CBD. And, you know, I think there is some scope for some more, especially, you know, with the development and expansion of the Central Queensland University, you know, having a CBD campus. There is probably some area where we could have student accommodation in the CBD. So there are a number of areas, but they're all, as you say, in the residential sector. I don't think there's much scope for commercial or retail further development in the CBD at all. I think what we'll see is more residential unit developments, maybe higher density student accommodation, something like that. Maybe even backpackers, you know, they seem to go well and seem to be popular. So that's the sort of area that I think that we will see the changing nature of CBD and the lifestyle it's going to offer. And a lot of people like it, and I can understand why. And
that makes complete sense, because we've seen CQU, and what's the other university that's just declared that they're going to build a premises here in Cairns, the convention centre? I mean, it makes sense that we would have the growing trend with that happening. So,
yeah. No, there's some scope for student accommodation.
Of course, yes. Sure. Yeah, very.
And remember, all those students like to have a coffee in between lectures and, you know, grab something to eat and have a sandwich and all of that. So they support the service businesses that are around those localities. So yeah, you know, that's where I think we're headed. As far as office space and retail, no, I don't think we'll see much development in that area.
And I suppose in the tropical north, where you can do all the outdoorsy things you want, it would really appeal to everybody in the world as well as in Australia domestically to come and study here. So it's a interesting thought if we had the ability to really. I mean, there's been a lot of press on foreign students, but whether you love them or hate them, they bring a lot of money into Australia. Well, of course.
And they can bring a lot of money into Cairns too. So, you know, we shouldn't write them off too quickly.
No, definitely not. Bill, what were you about to say?
I sometimes get a bit sort of frustrated with some of the go-to commentators that are come on the media sometimes in regards to Cairns real estate and sort of. I suppose they don't paint the completely rose-coloured glass picture, but they certainly don't sort of give it to us straight. But because especially from what I've seen driving around in the 6 years that I've been here, I've only seen sort of more places on Mulgrave Road become empty, and then I do also, because I'm doing renovations and that, I go into the lighter industrial areas. And there's usually someone closing up shop somewhere along the line or whatever. But just as a matter of interest, what do you think's a reasonable sized commercial property, say on Mulgrave Road? What's the worst one on there has for length of time on the books? Because I've noticed that what used to be the old Commonwealth Bank building on the corner of Brown Street, and it must be nearly 5 years that's been vacant.
Yeah.
Do you know of any that have sort of been longer than that?
No, that probably takes the record, that one. You know, we've got one that we've been working on just adjacent to Mulgrave Road, beautiful property, multi-use, could be used for all sorts of purposes, showroom, warehouse, workshops, all sorts of things. Good exposure, nice size, fully fenced, and we've had it vacant for a year. In the year, we've had a couple of sniffs on it, but really nothing substantial. And, you know, you look at a property like that and you think, why would that rent? And it's just because there's no demand. The tenants aren't moving around, and especially with COVID, are really staying put. You know, they're paying the rent where they are.
Well, and you can't do much about the fact that you've got the water and there's no horses to come and drink. So what are you supposed to do?
Mate, it's like throwing bait in the water when there's no fish.
Yeah.
You know, there's just nothing there. But
I guess there's a couple of different factors that we could appreciate there, and we could definitely. I mean, we've discussed the fact that the banks are getting tighter with the purse strings when it comes to actually making money more available. But I guess it comes down to the economic climate of Cairns, and if anybody had that capital to be able to invest, the confidence to invest in a place like Cairns currently, or Townsville for that matter. I guess that lots of different ways. It doesn't take much justification to say, you know what, this commercial property, even though it will have a good tenancy and it is on a prime location, I guess they're always going to have that facet of, well, I could just go and invest my money elsewhere, and because the outlook for Cairns isn't necessarily great, especially if there's no tourists coming here. So I guess the diversification is the fundamental issue that it boils down to, is our dependency on the tourist dollars to keep the economy going, not just in the CBD, but the whole of Cairns.
Oh, unquestionably. You know, we seem to have painted ourselves into a bit of a corner. I remember when I first started working in real estate in Cairns, Cairns had a very diverse industry base. You know, there was fishing and prawning, there was mining, you know, cattle, dairy. There was all sorts of things that used Cairns as their operational centre. That's not the case anymore. And, you know, we seem to have we put all our eggs in one basket, and we're paying that price now that the tourist sector is just not operating at all, and we've got a problem. And look,
but is it?
Yeah, is it us that's put the eggs in the basket or not? Is that what you were about to say, Bill?
No. But is it us that actually put the eggs in the one basket?
Exactly.
Sure. It wasn't the state government with their rules and regulations and a lot of the changes in against the agricultural side of things and their ability to grow. And then we used to had a vital shipbuilding industry.
Yep,
and in 2009, NQEA actually won the tender for the Air Warfare Destroyer contract. And they didn't get the backing of the state government in that they won the contract, but they didn't get the state government to come to the party with their requirements and that. And that contract got shoofed off and broken up and went to parts of South Australia and Newcastle and all around the place. But that if we had kept that contract, I think Cairns would have been a completely different city. And it seems that the state government has always trying to put us in that tourist box more than anyone else, rather than Cairns itself.
Yeah, 100% agree, Bill. You know, again, going back to the 70s and 80s, when NQEA was building control boats here down in Portsmouth, they employed 800 tradesmen. You know, that's 800 families, a whole lot of apprentices each year, all living out of that one business. You know, we have nothing like that. You know, even the sugar mills, there's so many sugar mills closed down around Cairns now. They used to provide apprenticeships for young kids leaving school every year. That's just not the case anymore. So it's getting tougher and tougher. And, you know, we need a diverse base of our industry. And look, we see it with our rental roll, our residential rental roll, because as people are applying for rental properties with us, you know, we ask them where they work and have they got a job and all that sort of thing. And, you know, so many people come here without work, looking for work. and they usually end up with part-time work in the tourist sector. Their days of getting good trades, really gone. And the building industry's had a little bit of a boost lately, but nothing like it used to be.
No,
just nothing at all.
No, and you know what? It's easy to see in a perspective, especially when we try to talk about real estate, because we've got you as our guest this evening. Is if there was 800 tradesmen employed in an industry or physical construction like boat building, and one car was bought by one employee every 15 years, that increases that increases the dynamic of a place like Mulgrave Road and wanting to have a dealership with a lot of space, with a lot of exposure, knowing that you had at least 800 people interested in buying a car every 15 years. And of course the property's not going to be worth much now without those 800 jobs. I mean, that's one industry that we can use as an example. But what about the other industries? Like you say, the cattle industry that used to come through Cairns, even in a minute way, that might be diverted now through a place like Townsville. But without those subsequent industries not in Cairns present to the extent that they were in the 70s and 80s, we can't expect confidence in real estate of any form, whether it's Mulgrave Road or the shops in the CBD, without that diversified economy. And the sooner we could diversify it, the better for many different reasons other than just the real estate.
Yeah, look, one of the things I look at, tourism is labour intensive, but it's very poorly paid labour. And a lot of it, so much of the labour that is employed in the tourist industry is either casual or permanent part-time.
Yes,
it's not
very service-based, yes.
Now, and the problem with that is those people cannot get a bank loan to buy a house. The bank isn't going to lend money to someone on casual rates. They want you to have a full-time permanent job. So all of those people that are in that situation where they're only earning part-time wages, none of them are starters to buy a house. All of them are going into the rental market. And we've come a full circle in our conversation. As I said before, the rental market is under enormous pressure, and rents are really starting to rise dramatically now. And that's going to cause a whole lot of social issues.
Well, yes, and we're already seeing it prevalent in places like Townsville as well as in Cairns. And you only need to have a conversation or follow Facebook pages like the new one, CJAG, where they follow all the comings and goings of crime and justice in the Cairns area and as well as Townsville. It is getting more and more. It's getting worse. It's crazy. And I was about to say earlier when you mentioned tumbleweeds going down Flinders. What's the main Dragon
Flinders Street, yeah.
Flinders Street. When you mentioned tumbleweeds going down Flinders Street,
yeah.
I worry for the tumbleweed getting run over by a stolen car. So we only need to see how bad it is in that regard as well. And crime's just one component.
But look, David, let me tell you that in our core business here is now rentals, right? The residential rentals, and we do a lot of it. When I say that we're under pressure here, we frequently see people coming into our front counter saying we are desperate for accommodation, we're couch surfing, or we're living in a car. Now, when I say frequently, I mean 2 or 3 times a month minimum. We're encountering those sorts of people in desperate situations. Now, look, this is Cairns.
And you're one real estate agent.
People living in their cars in Cairns.
Yes, and you're one shop.
One of many.
You're one of many who will no doubt experience those.
One of too many.
Well, of course, but that's the point. If you guys yourselves are experiencing those 2 or 3 a month, I mean, collectively with all the real estate agents that might have those walk-ins.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
Yes.
If you talk to the government agencies who are out there trying to help people in these desperate situations, they will tell you that they're just inundated.
Yes.
With people looking for accommodation. They can't find it. And, whilst we have vacancy rates of 1%, that puts a lot of upward pressure on rentals. Now, rents are going up dramatically at the moment, but so much of the Cairns population, certainly the Cairns rental population, live on fixed incomes. And by that I mean they're getting welfare of some description, whether it's pension, whether it's unemployment benefits or NIDS or whatever it is. They're recipients of some form of welfare. Now, if rents keep going up, their welfare payments aren't going up. So if rent goes up $10 a week, that's $10 less they've got to spend on groceries. So, there's a lot of social problems at the moment, and I really think, and I've spoken to a number of politicians about this who have shown exactly zero interest, but the government is going to have to do something to encourage private sector investment back into the residential rental market. There's just not enough rental houses.
Yeah, well, Alex, I've got an interesting question now too, and it's only slightly off topic, but it's got predominantly to do with the rental market. Because I know at the start of the year when COVID was first breaking out, I remember seeing, I believe it was the REIQ releasing a very detailed list of how every single premises owner, property owner, should be disgusted with the state government's release of you cannot evict anybody who lives in your property. Look, I can't remember it predominantly, and I do believe that they might have retracted that policy that they were going to enact. And obviously these hard times call for measures from both property owners as well as people renting those properties, as well as the government to have to outlay some sort of formwork for people to make those arrangements. But I seem to remember it was quite draconian in what the state government was trying to put upon property owners, and they're suffering just as much as the people renting their properties. How did that end up? Because I don't actually remember how.
Okay, well, what you're saying is Victor Brenny, the Minister for Housing, came out with basically a proposal which was a license for tenants to squat.
That's right.
You couldn't evict them. They didn't have to pay their rent. You couldn't go in. You couldn't do inspections. You couldn't do anything. The REIQ, to their credit, and credit where credit's due, they took up the cudgel and fought it publicly and had all of that overturned. The final framework, which was enacted, is pretty fair, to be honest. A tenant, if they can prove that they're COVID-19 impacted, has a number of rights where they can have their rent reduced or defer rental payments, and landlords the same, So, and we found during this period, a lot of tenants were very good. We had for a while there, we had tenants ringing up saying, I'm not paying my rent. We'd say, why? And they'd say, well, the landlords don't have to pay their mortgages. So, well, where did you hear that? Because they sure do have to pay their mortgages. And those landlords that took a deferral on their mortgage payments are now facing 6 months of back payments that they have to pay. And that, in fact, means paying interest on interest. So trust me, the banks never lose out. Generally, the tenants have been pretty good. Once we explained to them that they can't have a rental reduction unless they were genuinely impacted by COVID-19, working for the tourist industry or one of these boats going out to the REIQ, and they've been put off. We didn't really have a lot of it in our rent roll. But something I'll tell you about our rent roll is that nearly 43% of our rental income comes directly from the government. So their rental assistance comes directly from the government into my trust account. So there's the rental population in Cairns has a huge unemployment base. Now, from our point of view, that's all good business, because not only did they not suffer, they were given a pay rise. So the unemployed during COVID have done very well. So look, the REIQ did a great job.
Well, I was about to commend them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, what Victor Brenny originally suggested was just plain straight out stupid, and it showed a total lack of understanding of the commercial world. And if you have a look at his resume, you'll see why.
Well, I guess it's something that we're used to dealing with when it comes to politicians from the southeast corner, because I mean, to be able to get onto a TV screen without the foresight and forethought of thinking of the ramifications for property owners when it came to that sort of draconian policy that they're going to enact that protected, what is essentially, and I'll just say it, what is essentially going to be a Labor voting base, and I'm just saying that from my own opinion, of course, but
you're right.
To actively just say, oh, don't worry about don't worry about paying. You won't be evicted. No one can do anything about taking you out of your property. And to see a small family that might have just broken into the property market by owning a unit and being forced to go into foreclosure or whatever the terms might be when you can't make your payments on the mortgage is absurd. And I guess it's just an example of how the power of policy.
As I said before, it completely ignored the fact that so many landlords have saved all their life for a rental home, which forms the cornerstone of their superannuation, and that they use that rental income to feed themselves. That's their income. That's their life. They're self-funded retirees. And they're not out harvesting their money trees every night and lighting up cigars with $100 bills.
No.
You know, they use rental income to pay their bills. Now, a lot of them have mortgages that have to be paid. The rates have to be paid. The insurance has to be paid. You know, all those expenses, they never went away. You know, so they did it very hard. What Mick de Brenny came up with had no sort of sympathy for the plight of those people. It was very, very unfair and one-sided. So, you know, thank God the REIQ did what it did and managed to have it renegotiated and changed.
Well, just lucky there are bodies like the REIQ to keep it in check for these ridiculous things that they go to enact upon the population of Queensland at the moment. So, look, lucky that one was avoided.
If I could just the Residential Tenancy Authority is a government-based organisation that, watches over the residential rental world. And it has a board of directors, like all of these organisations. Now, we used to always have a real estate representative on that board, and that particular woman lives here in Cairns. And she was on the board for 6 or 7 years. Now, Mick de Brenny has just terminated her directorship, and I can tell you that board does not have a real estate representative on it anymore. So that whole industry in the rental world is no longer represented by a real estate representative on the board of the RTA, and I just think that's disgraceful.
Wow. Okay. That's an interesting comment, because it would be like having a room full of generals and none of them actually served in a war. It would.
Yeah, well, what you get is a whole lot of solicitors, and,
of course, yeah,
you know, left wing social workers, and you need people that have been at the pit face and have seen what the rental world is like, what it's like to spend a day in a rental office, and there's no one on that board now that fits that description.
That's a very sad
again,
thing.
you know, this is Brisbane-based bureaucracy and taking, no notice of the regions, no notice of the industry, no notice of the private sector. I was pretty disgusted by it all, I can tell you.
Well, Alex, I guess let's talk close future. Let's talk a future that's only around the corner. It's post 2020, and there's a commission into a new state, and the lines have been drawn, and they're putting up the governing bodies to be able to say, right, this is happening. We're making our government departments. How would they approach? I mean, there's obviously, when it comes to any part of the country or any part of the world for that matter, there's always going to be the intricacies of the industries, and real estate in Cairns is no different to real estate anywhere else in the country, but it does have its intricacies, and it's different in many different ways. Like you say, if 40-odd% or more of your portfolio comes directly from unemployment benefits and things like that, not necessarily just unemployment benefits, what would be one of the policies you like to see enacted in a place like Central and North Queensland, a new state of Central and North Queensland, that would make sense here more than it would anywhere else in the whole of the country or anywhere else in the rest of this state existing at the moment? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I do. I think the first thing they should do is make Alex Witten the Premier. Then after that, everything will just fall into place. Trust me.
Well, of course. well, you know, we're just like that right person at the reins. That's all it is. I agree.
Look, you know, I've had many discussions on the proposed new state. I mean, there's so many benefits that would befall us up here in North Queensland, and I get frustrated. I feel that we're at the end of the road and we don't get the services that we're entitled to. But look, as far as real estate is concerned, what goes on in the regional areas such as Cairns, Cooktown, Weipa, Mount Isa, all of these small towns, they're all different and they have almost nothing in common with Brisbane. And, what we need is a diverse base of industry operatives who can act as an advisory board to the minister and ensure that the minister is getting the relevant feedback that he needs to make the right decisions. So, look, again, you'd probably be operating through an industry peak body like the REIQ, it would now be the Far North Queensland Real Estate Institute, but you'd have a peak body which would represent the industry and the industry's concerns to the minister. At the moment, the minister isn't interested in what we say to him at all. He's got his own agenda.
Well, when there's 4.5 million people concentrated into the southeast corner, he's only going to take the advice and have his ear open to those that were the most prevalent and loud, and then that's always going to be a representative from some sort of body from the southeast corner. Bill, did you have a thought? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say in regards to a lot of people keep going on about Brisbane in regards to it's the distance and they don't know what's going on and all that sort of thing, and really it's not that at all, because the people in the administrators in Brisbane and the politicians in Brisbane know exactly what's going on in our regions. I mean, we've got communications these days, instantaneous. People can pick up a phone, show a video at the same time, so they know what's going on all the time. The difference is the disparity between the wants of the people, the 4 million people in southeast Queensland and their expectation versus the needs of the people in regional Queensland. There's no comparison. It's just beyond Brisbane now and the Queensland Parliament to write legislation that meets the sensitivities of the people in southeast Queensland, and there's nearly 4 million of them, versus that policy being mindful of the people in regional Queensland. They just can't do it because they're completely two dynamic, different communities with different expectations and needs. So it really does. We need to be separated from that 4 million people and their view of the world, and just operate with 1 million people with our view of the world.
Well, I guess we could look at one simple example. We could look at one simple example of imagine a property developer in a place like Cairns that has to do a lot more hoop jumps, even when it comes to the environmental impact statements and whatnot, compared to a place like developing in the CBD of Brisbane or anywhere around in the suburbs there. It's just the significant amount of hoop jumping that someone developing land here would have to take would be significant. Would that be a correct statement, Alex?
Oh, 100%. And even if you look at the governance of the local authorities, about 6-7 years ago, the Cairns City Council had to build a new sewage treatment works, which was forced upon us by the federal government, who brought in new environmental laws. I think that cost the Cairns ratepayers about $100 million. I take the attitude, if the Great Barrier Reef is owned by Australia and all Australian citizens have a stake in it, then all Australian citizens should have helped pay for that sewage treatment works. We seem to be made to pay for a lot of stuff up here that benefits the whole country, and it's just wrong. But while we have an electoral system where there are only 17 electorates north of Gympie, it's never going to change, because the fact of the matter is my vote doesn't matter. Your vote doesn't matter. Any vote north of Mackay doesn't matter. The elections are won and lost in southeast Queensland, and while that's the case, we got no chance.
Exactly right. And look, and Cairns is only used, and everyone's guilty in federal politics and state politics. Everyone is guilty of only using Cairns as a backdrop to declare a new policy or an increase in funds available to the tourist sector. It's got to stop. It's got to stop. We're just a backdrop for those sort of, get the cameras, guys. Get the backdrop of the Great Barrier Reef. Oh yeah, we're not only we're reducing waste and reducing emissions, we're increasing the amount of money that is going to allow for people to come and visit Cairns and enjoy everything. It's a diversified economy. We just need so much more. We're more than that.
But no one's even looking at a diversified economy. I mean, it's only a week ago we saw the Premier come to Cairns and have big pressy, and the local members were standing behind her, smiling and nodding their heads. I mean, the only time you ever see them is at election time. And they come out, they say they're going to throw money here and throw money there, but we never really see any benefit from it.
You forgot to mention the backpatting,
I'm
Alex.
totally over it.
You forgot to mention the backpacking.
What's that?
The pats on the back, patting each other on the back. You forgot to mention that as well in the press conference. That's such a great job that they're doing.
Look, we're being cynical, but we have every right to. And we've become cynical because we've been watching this process for years and years and years.
Yeah. Well, then it's up to us to do something about it. The locals. But one other thing about diversification, there's very little chance of the current situation that we've got where the state government is going to help us get a diverse economy. What we need, I keep banging on, the separate state, but the key is those 12 senators you get with a separate state.
Yep.
The 12 senators are going to be down in Canberra looking after us.
Yep.
They will be going to bat to get those government contracts. We won't lose out our patrol boats again if we've got 12 senators going to bat for us and our shipbuilding industry. And we're likely to get a lot more. It actually goes
further than that. If you think of what the difference 12 senators would make to the makeup of the Senate, it would totally change the way the Senate operates.
100%, yes.
You wouldn't have, the impact that some of these minority parties have on the Senate. It could entirely change the operation of the entire Senate. So it's a big deal, and I think it's one of the reasons why our current governments are quite hesitant about entering into this debate on a separate state. But those 12 senators that you're talking about would totally change the structure of the Senate.
There's another component I want to touch on, gentlemen, is not only would it increase change the dynamic for the good in this places like the Senate, we won't necessarily get any more seats of House of Reps seats. It'll still be roughly 5 for Central and North Queensland. But the dynamic of moving away from a constant series of hung parliaments, especially when it comes to like the House of Reps that obviously make federal government, is I seem to remember when the seat of Winton helped form government a few years ago that they basically, one of the stipulations was to upgrade the hospital there. I remember listening to a podcast where the reporter was saying that they've got the newest, bestest and brightest hospital in the whole of Australia, regional Australia, outside the cities, and it's only ever at 20% capacity at its busiest. And I guess at what point do we realise that not only is it beneficial for us to have that more reasonable ability to logically make decisions and spend money accordingly instead of just election promises to help form government, because it's no good for anybody that somebody like, let's say, the Catters got in a position to form a government after the October elections at the end of the year and basically get everything for 3 or 4 or 5 electorates in where their representatives might be present. It just doesn't make any sense that anybody, even inside of those electorates, could be happy with that sort of arrangement. We need to break away from it.
Well, we do need to break away from it. You touched on the biggest problem is that these decisions, these capital works decisions, are now being made for political gain and not for the betterment of the electorate or the state. They're made to help a particular political party maintain power. And that's the wrong reason for making these decisions. And, we're seeing it all the time. We're seeing a Senate that's now controlled by 2 or 3 independent senators that can swing any way. We have a difficult situation in our political structure at the moment. And you're dead right. The decisions are being made for political gain and not for the betterment of the country.
Yes. Interesting. Just, guys, bear with me for a second.
Can we just change the subject for a sec?
Yeah, let's.
In the last 2 years, we've had Gaston Aboud come into the Cairns market. Although it's a bit of a wrong time for him. He just got his got them all opened up, and then the COVID hit.
His timing was appalling, and not his fault. Not his fault.
No,
just the way it turned out.
Yeah, but I can think that if we didn't have his personal investment in those 3 major properties and his other interests out in, I think he's got a cattle interest or whatever, and he's also up the marina in Port Douglas. If we didn't have that almost $1 billion injections from him in those preceding 2 years from now, what do you think the Cairns would have looked like without that private investments? Because we certainly didn't have anything from the public investment side to match that.
You're dead right, Bill. And when he started all of those developments, everyone was scratching our heads as to why he was doing it, because it was hard to see that there was a demand at that time for that many more hotel beds in Cairns. Now, he's a smarter man than me. I'm the first to admit it, and clearly he has contacts, and maybe he had information that there were going to be more tourists coming here. But really and truly, it was hard to see where the demand for all of those beds was going to come from. So, it was a wonderful thing that he did put all his money into here. As you said, he's invested a huge amount of money. He's created jobs. He's done so much for the local economy. If we didn't have that, it would have been a much sadder situation, that's for sure.
And I think the other thing is that came out of that, how good was Prime as the main contractor, as getting the job done? Yet they don't seem to get a Guernsey in any public work at the moment. I mean, it's going to Lend-Lease and national companies, and even the thing like the upgrade of the convention centre.
Oh, yes.
The fallout from that, we've got next to nothing. We've got a few minor lousy, we got the fencing, the safety fencing, and the rubbish removal, and a few other odds and ends. But of that $176 million, let's say with overrun, say it's $200 million. The Cairns business side of it would be lucky to get $10 million out of that contract. And the thing that gets me, right, so it's not a great deal of economic benefit to Cairns itself, as in flow down from companies doing well and then passing profits on, buying other bits and pieces and that. There's little economic gain from it. But those people down in Queensland and in Brisbane, when it comes to saying, we gave you so much more per capita, for compared to the people in Brisbane, so you're being well looked after. But things like that convention centre show how very little of the per capita spending actually benefits the people in central and North Queensland. It benefits the economy of southeast Queensland much more than the economy of Cairns.
Well, I guess, and the simple point is when you award a certain contract like the convention centre to, say, the plumbing or the electrical works gets to a Melbourne or a Sydney or a Brisbane firm, is what percentage of that staff in administration costs is going to be based down there as well. There's no purchasing officer necessarily based here. None of these ancillary administrative staff that would necessarily be on those $80,000 a year administrative staff wages are circulating their wage up here, having their children in a Cairns-based school. So it's just a terrible situation when it comes especially to a state government-sanctioned upgrade.
Yeah, and of course this is the area that Phil Castle's organisation is pursuing all the time to try and get more and more local content into these tender processes. We keep getting, it's the old story, we keep getting promised that this won't happen, but it always does. nothing changes. Life just keeps going on, and we keep accepting it. I admire Phil and what he's trying to do, and I wish him every success. But it just seems that we keep making the same mistakes.
Just on that, with Phil. Phil was also spoke on our show earlier on in the piece, probably in about episodes 7 or 8. But he also spoke at our forum with Professor Flint. Now, he was originally part of the overall Queensland Construction Industry Association, and he made the move to get basically a North Queensland Association, which has been fairly successful, and has probably got more members than the original whole Queensland Association. Do you think there's a lot of value of organisations to sort of get their sort of peak bodies more aligned with even their regions? Like I always have problems with my run-in with the sugar industry is Paul Shambrew. I mean, sugar industry is basically North Queensland. Right? You can say there's a bit of sugar down in. He keeps giving me about the Gold Coast one down at Rocky Point, that produces nothing, and he's got to look after them as part of his tenure, and then Bundaberg. But the bulk of sugar is in North Queensland, in the Burdekin and way up to Mosman. But the office, like the peak body, sits there in Brisbane, has lunches with the bureaucrats across the road from the state government, liaises with them all the time, and really I don't see their connection to the actual farmer who's paying their wages, because most of those people down there, I've been down there and studied in their offices and talked to them. They've never been on a cane farm in their life. They've grown up in Brisbane. They've gone to university in Brisbane. And they've got a job in Brisbane. They're spending their money in Brisbane. But it seems pointless. I mean, unless people, like in the cane industry, can at least move their peak body to, say, Mackay or Townsville, where they've got the people they represent's got their ear all the time, not the government having their ear all the time. Things need to change, I think, to get that way. Do you see a role for, say, a real estate institute of North Queensland or something like that? Better serve your
Bill, we're singing from the same hymn book here, because I really have a problem with the REIQ now. And as David said earlier, I'm an old director of the Institute. I've held every branch position that there is. I used to do all of the arbitrations for North Queensland for the REIQ. I've been heavily involved in it for so long, and I'm just so disgusted with it now. It's just become a Brisbane-based bureaucracy. Now, having said that, I thought they did a good job with the COVID thing, and I praised them and I gave them credit for what they did. But the bottom line is the REIQ today is not the REIQ that it used to be. And the needs of the regional agents are not being met. They no longer conduct specialist courses in North Queensland. If I want to do a specialist course now, I have to fly to Brisbane. There are so many areas. They sacked all of the regional managers for the REIQ. So there's no regional managers anymore. There's lots of areas that I think the REIQ has gone wrong. And yes, I think we need a regional basis for our industry. And I would think a lot of industries feel the same. But certainly my industry is suffering.
Well, I guess that can come down to a simple component as well, and to what we're experiencing with this abundance of representatives in the parliament that are concentrated in the southeast corner. And I must admit, we are approaching an hour, gentlemen. So I guess I'll start making wrapping up points as much as I can. But there's no emotional investment, because if we're going to have peak bodies as well as the parliament, not necessarily having any emotional investment to the communities that allegedly their counterparts, even in their respective parties, their counterparts in their respective parties represent, up in places like Cairns, up in places like Townsville, up in places like Charters Towers. if there's no if there's no emotional attachment to wanting and making sure that these communities, all these industries, like the real estate industry in Cairns or the sugar industry based predominantly in North Queensland and Central Queensland, there's no connect. And if there's no connect, it's not necessarily going to be something that is on the top of your mind every single waking day going, I really want to make sure that all those other cane growers that I grew up with and went fishing and camping with and spent the whole of my life and love and respect, I want to make sure that this government is not going to enact any sort of draconian policy that will only make our lives harder and our jobs significantly more difficult. And I guess if you're born, bred, raised and educated in southeast Queensland and then put in a position to represent the real estate industry of the whole of the state or represent an industry like the sugarcane growers, it seems absurd to me. And I guess it's all the more that there should be that connect back again with these centres being based in the places that they're supposed to be representing, both in the parliament being in a new state as well as these governing bodies. It only works in so many different ways for the better if we make a new state in that regard.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I can tell you, David, I often speak to my friends in Brisbane and tell them about some of the issues that we deal with in far north Queensland, and they sit there with their mouths open. They just have no idea. Like I told them about the problem that we have with insurance, and they just couldn't believe that we pay double the insurance up here on our houses that they do in Brisbane. So, there's lots of areas. So, we need to have this debate. We certainly do.
Well, and the sooner we have it, and the sooner that we can convince everybody that the way forward for Central and North Queensland is a way forward that we can determine our own destiny, and that's in the new state. That's in a parliament that actively cares about wanting to make sure that the community benefits as a whole, and not necessarily trying to keep a government in power based on the fact that 73 seats are concentrated in 250 kilometres from the CBD of Brisbane, and it's got to change. We need that diversified and spread out electorates in a new parliament. It's only going to be beneficial to us in every single way. Bill, did you have any finishing thoughts as we want to wrap up tonight's episode, seeing as how it's come up to an hour?
Yes, well, I think our only hope is our economy for all this, for our real estate to improve and our general position improve is if we actually develop and grow. And I don't believe the current status quo is going to provide for that. We need a drastic change that's going to provide growth and opportunity, and that in turn will serve all industries and all peoples in Central and North Queensland for their future and their children's future.
Well, if it continues on the way that it is and the current way we're administered from the southeast corner, there's a lot less of a future than there should be, especially when we're the power. We could essentially be the powerhouse of the nation when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to mining. So, look, it's interesting times ahead, and it's only going to be more interesting times if we can convince more and more people that the new state is the way forward for all of us. So, Alex, did you have any finishing thoughts as we finish up?
Oh, look, not really, David. Thank you for having me tonight and letting me vent my spleen and have a say. I've been on board with this idea right from its inception, or probably not as long as Bill has, but certainly for a while now. And I'd like to see this debate developed. And look, I'm here and I'm ready to be party to that debate. But just remember, Alex Witten for Premier.
I was about to say something similar. I was about to say, and just remember, everybody, vote one, Alex Witten, when it comes to the time in a few years. and you know what, Alex, I must admit, and I do mean it as a compliment, you'd be a far superior Premier for the new state of Central and North Queensland than any Premier in the current one. At least coming up to the state election.
Wouldn't be hard, mate. Wouldn't be hard.
That's my point.
That's not a big job.
I do mean it as a compliment, though, mate. I do mean it as a compliment. Well, thank you again. Thank you again for taking time out of your evening to come and join us for an hour and have a chat. It's been an absolute pleasure. And again, thank you for taking time out of your week as well. So thank you, Alex.
Pleasure, David. Thank you, Bill.
That's all right. Ladies and gentlemen,
thanks, Alex.
If you've been enjoying the podcast and you'd like to learn more about the campaign for the creation of a new state, you can visit our website, bootbrisbane.com, where you can download flyers and learn more in general about the campaign and the historical components, as well as how even in 1890 there was plans to make Queensland into 3 separate states before Federation came around. Likewise, you can follow us on our Facebook page at bootbrisbane.com. which is the actual name of the Facebook page, as well as thanks to the sponsor of tonight's podcast is Yes to a North Queensland State. So head over to Facebook or visit the website to learn more, and tell your friends if it's an interesting discussion with people talking about how things are and how things should be when it comes to the communities around them. So listen more, and likewise, if you enjoyed tonight's podcast and would like to listen to more interesting interviews and interesting people like Alex tonight, you can look up Northern Vibe, where there's a host, Matt Maloney, who talks about the same sort of issues in central North Queensland. So thank you, Bill. Thank you, Alex. Good evening. And if you're listening, thanks very much, and see you next week.
Good evening.
Good night, David.
Good night,
Alex.
Yeah, good night, Bill. Good night, David. Bye.